good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Hi, my name is Wendy Roletter-Sook, and I'm the chair of the Department of Communication Studies, Law, and Political Science. So I'm excited to welcome you to another American Democracy Project Times Talk. So thank you to everybody who is attending here in person, and we also have some people joining us via Zoom as well. I also want to take a minute to recognize our partnership with the Tebow Library, who is here in recording sessions for us so that you can watch these later and get to more people who aren't able to make it today. So the American Democracy Project is housed in our department, but this is a campus-wide initiative bringing topics to you for civil discourse that are important of the day and things that are happening around the world. Today is another example of that. We have Dr. Tamara Lynn, who is the chair and professor of the Criminal Justice Program, and she's here to talk about de-escalation, so teaching de-escalation in a democratic society, training, trust, and public accountability. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn the mic over to her. Welcome.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to the American Democracy Project for having me here today. Dr. Steele also was scheduled to be here but had a conflict, and so he's turned it over to me. And I'm confident that we'll still get the information out there. So, policing in a moment of crisis. I think everyone can agree law enforcement right now appears to be in crisis. We see that anytime that we turn on the news, a lot of public outrage against some different things that law enforcement has done, whether that is unnecessary force or too much force in a particular situation, and then we also see that in terms of protests specifically regarding ICE. So just a little bit of back history of why Dr. Steele and I are even involved here is going back to 2020, and immediately within the time frame of the riots that were taking place during the George Floyd situation, we were presented an opportunity to become a regional training center of the National De-Escalation Training Center. And so we really bought into the vision of that, bringing advanced de-escalation training to law enforcement across the U.S. And in that opportunity, we also then were very instrumental, Fort Hays was instrumental in helping Congress develop the National De-Escalation Training Act and funding that. So we currently have brought in $3.55 million in grant funding to deliver de-escalation across the central U.S. And then 2 other regions have come on, have also brought in over $3 million. So we're pretty proud of the work that we have done, and this presentation captures some of that, but also talks about the importance of legitimacy and procedural justice for law enforcement. So, stemming back to 2020, and currently, anytime we see something negative in the media regarding law enforcement, we'll hear things like we need to defund the police, or we need to abolish the police. A lot of groups believe that if we put the funding that's going to law enforcement to other social issues, such as poverty, mental health, things like that, then that would reduce the need for even having a law enforcement agency. Now, Dr. Steele and I are not advocating for that. We think there's another way that we can improve policing and still have other funding available then to these other social ills. So police have a really unique role in society. They are the first ones who are called anytime something goes wrong. So this could be even related to homelessness and people calling because maybe a homeless person won't vacate their property. It could be the result of drugs, both crime related to drugs, but then also drug offenders engaged in behaviors that initiate law enforcement contact. It could be a mental health issue. And I think we see a lot of situations in the news where maybe someone had called because a family member was experiencing a mental health crisis. That crisis becomes violent, and then law enforcement responds the way they were trained, when maybe they weren't the right ones that should be called to that situation even to begin with. So even though law enforcement isn't responsible for the homelessness, drug issues, things like that, they are usually the first ones called in those situations. Now, protests of other issues, anytime we have protests that garners response of law enforcement, that's a topic for a different day. Dr. Steele and I wanted to emphasize that is not the discussion for today. That warrants a whole separate discussion. So the root of the issue, law enforcement has really become a jack of all trades. So they're expected to respond. If somebody's calling dispatch because they have a crisis, law enforcement must respond. But then they have to deal with these situations that they're not necessarily trained to deal with. And that has exacerbated the problem. So, looking at the officers specifically, law enforcement is a very stressful position. They arrive to these encounters that heighten their stress, and they need to be prepared to deal with them in a way that they don't allow their stress to control the situation. They need to be empathetic. Sometimes we think of law enforcement as anything but empathetic. But de-escalation training that I'll be talking about more is really a valuable tool that law enforcement now have at their disposal that can show them ways to not only deal empathetically, but to recognize an individual and what they're dealing with, as well as understanding what motivates them so they can respond in a way that's best going to get the results that they need. Regardless of the stress, I want to emphasize that being stressed out never warrants unnecessary use of force. So, police legitimacy is the foundation of communities seeing law enforcement as legitimate. That they have a reason to be there. It increases compliance with the law. It increases cooperation and support for law enforcement's mission. So when communities don't view law enforcement as legitimate, that's when we start to see a lot more resistance to what they're doing. This is where community-oriented policing and procedural justice comes in. Procedural justice is the foundation of police legitimacy. But if law enforcement are acting in a procedurally just manner, then communities are more apt to see them as legitimate in terms of their mission for being there and to gain compliance from them. So community-oriented policing, at its simplest foundation, is law enforcement communicating and acting in a way with communities that they build trust and they build that legitimacy. So government itself, which law enforcement represents the power of the state, if government is dictating certain responses, law enforcement has nothing they can do except support what the law states. So we want the government to work closely with law enforcement to make sure that laws that are being passed are fair, equitable, and obviously unbiased as well. So community-oriented policing is law enforcement coming in, acting in a manner that's increasing trust within the community. So, de-escalation training, this is where we come in. Our program focuses on 3 key levels of training. The first level is basic procedural justice. If an officer doesn't act in a procedurally just manner, they are not going to be successful in stabilizing or de-escalating a situation. With that also comes self-control. If an officer has no control, the hopes of de-escalating a situation are gone. It's not going to happen. So we really focus on emotional intelligence in our course. So first, officers recognize the things that really push their buttons. All of us have things that just kind of get under our skin and irritate us. But law enforcement, when those things happen and they're in these stressful situations, if they don't recognize that, that's going to escalate them, which then escalates the situation that they're dealing with. So we're teaching them how to communicate respect based on their own self-awareness, as well as using procedural justice. So they're communicating without bias, they're being fair, that if they're administering the law this way with one individual, they're administering it the same way with another individual, meaning they're not singling out anyone. They're also giving people a voice. Through our encounters with law enforcement, we've found consistently that most complaints about law enforcement is because an officer just wouldn't listen to them. So if someone else then is listening to them during that complaint, typically that resolves the issue. They don't care to take it any further because someone was willing to hear them. So if we can help officers understand that on the street and in those basic encounters, then that already reduces the likelihood of escalation, just listening to their side of the story. It doesn't change the outcome. If they're still going to get a ticket, they're still going to get a ticket. I've been pulled over plenty of times, and I can give lots of excuses, but the officer already knows I'm either going to get a ticket or a warning, and nothing I say is going to change that. So giving people a voice is not the same as letting them get off with something. And then again, enforcing the law fairly. So force needs to be used justly. Law enforcement is the profession in the U.S. that has state-sanctioned opportunities for force. I think everyone can envision a time when force is absolutely necessary, such as an active shooter situation. Is it a good outcome? No. Loss of life is never a good outcome. But there are times we just can't get away from it. But if we can teach officers to manage situations without resorting to force or unnecessary force, we actually can reduce the likelihood of these encounters occurring. So, public first needs to understand that the use of force always has to be available for law enforcement. Again, we cannot take that away. But by teaching them the advanced de-escalation that we offer, then that reduces the need for force. So I gave you the first level of our training, which is procedural justice, aligned with officer self-control. The second level is crisis intervention training. That allows officers to recognize someone who's either experiencing a physical or mental health crisis, or they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. In those situations, an individual may not and probably cannot be de-escalated due to these other factors that are going on. So when an officer recognizes that more quickly, then they can get the support needed to get that individual help rather than resorting to use of force. Now, we have a guest with us today. I didn't know he was coming, but I told him I would put him on the spot. Retired Sergeant David Velaisi, he's also one of your newly elected city commissioners. He is one of our premier trainers, and he has a recent testimonial from an agency specifically to the crisis intervention. Do you want to share that?
Sure. Hello. Wasn't expecting this today, but while facilitating this training down in Hennessy, Oklahoma, we had a very small class, but they just dove in 100% into the material. At the end of the class, they were very excited to invite us back and host again, but within a couple of weeks, before they could even host their next course to get more training, the chief of police down there reached out to me and told me about an incident that they had had. Him and another officer had responded to a welfare check on a subject who, if I remember right, was threatening to harm himself with a firearm or others. And when they get there, he's sitting in his vehicle and it's not going well. They're struggling to get cooperation out of this guy. obviously not mentally stable. There's weapons potentially involved. It's a very tense situation for them. But as they're going through the situation, the chief remembered his training. He specifically said while they were going, and it was just like hitting a brick wall, it was like a light bulb went off. And he's like, oh, now I know what's going on and why this isn't working. And they shifted their approach, and when they did that, within a matter of minutes, they were able to get this gentleman to comply and to go down and get an actual mental health screening. And it ended with no use of force whatsoever. But it was thanks to our training. It was a great little testimony that they offered.
Thank you, David. So that's the most recent testimony we've had, but we've had other agencies who've also reached out with somewhat similar examples, to where with the training, they were able to see that someone was not in the right frame of mind for whatever reason, and they were able to employ different tactics that come back to time, space, and understanding. So giving the individual some time, even though this individual had a firearm, which increased the likelihood of risk, they gave him some space, they backed off, they were able to communicate with them, and then things went the way they should go. And the individual was screened for mental health placement, no force. So those are the types of testimonials we love to hear. So going on, obviously we live in a society, everyone has an opinion about law enforcement. We just want to help everyone understand that regardless of our opinions on law enforcement and their role, recognizing that they're in their position by the power of the state to enforce the state's laws. So in order for the police to be legitimate, it's really important that communities recognize that they have honest and fair motives. I'll field the question now, but I know someone's going to say, well, what about the outliers that maybe they don't have fair motives? I also would counter that argument with, I think every profession has outliers. And hopefully through this training, we can decrease the number of those so that people do see law enforcement as being fair and unbiased. So when we think about force connected to law enforcement, we want to kind of separate that for a minute and think about their role as customer servants. We have service there, they're in a customer service role, but they're customer servants. So when officers stop and take the time to listen to the public, they respond to their concerns, then that starts to increase the legitimacy. And that's not only important for the officers who are in the streets, but also important for administrators and law enforcement agencies as well. To get out there, show that they're connected to the community and that they're an important part of the community and that they support the community that they're serving. And then our training specifically just really gets down to the fundamentals of communication. If I recognize that someone is they're motivated by time and tasks, they've got places to go, I'm not going to intentionally prolong my encounter with them. That could escalate the situation. Instead, I'm going to do what needs to be done, whether that's a ticket or a warning, and I'm going to quickly get them on their way. Similarly, if someone wants to know the details about why they're being pulled over or why law enforcement is at their home, I want to give them time to answer all of those questions for them, so that there are no questions that might come back. But recognizing those things allows us to communicate with them in a way that meets their preferred communication style. Okay, so framing this in terms of procedural justice and police legitimacy, that's the foundation of our training. It's also the foundation of community policing, letting the public know that law enforcement is a part of the community. And if we don't have those, procedural justice or police legitimacy, then law enforcement is not going to be trusted. There's been a number of community policing reforms. I know the article, New York Times article that was made available to you, that talks about increasing training specifically to promote trust and procedural justice across communities. There are other articles that capture the De-Escalation Training Act of 2022 that mandated the de-escalation training, not ours specifically, but de-escalation training programs in general. And we could even go back further, the consent decrees that were required by the federal government to agencies who had a long history of racial bias and excessive force and things like that. So de-escalation, I want to emphasize, it's not an end-all cure-all, meaning there will always be situations where an officer either goes too far or an individual can't be de-escalated. But by promoting de-escalation and giving more officers the tool to use it, that decreases the likelihood of unnecessary force, which then promotes legitimacy by agencies. So some different things that can be done in terms of community policing that already occur. De-emphasizing broken windows theory. So we've got several criminal justice majors in here who can just give the group a real quick rundown on broken windows theory.
If nobody takes care of anything, then why should I care about crime in the first place?
Okay, thank you, Dominic. So he said that if nobody cares about anything or fixing anything, why should I care? And broken windows theory really focuses on the small, disorderly offenses. And it's like if the agency really hits those small offenses hard, then other people will see we're not going to engage in crime and disorder. So there's been a history of disproving that that's an effective approach to crime. That also goes with zero tolerance policing. That we need to look at situations each individually. Yes, we need to follow the law, but our laws can't approach things from that very minimal scale of what's going on. But then also getting out into the community and knowing the individuals whom you're serving in that particular community. Even in the larger cities, you can get down to neighborhood area events to try to promote community policing and build those relationships with the individuals whom you are policing in those areas. It also then promotes policing within themselves. So it's a good form of informal control when residents see that, our law enforcement agency is legitimate and we're going to help them out by not tolerating some of these other activities. So, thinking about legitimate authorities. Not only is law enforcement intended to be a legitimate authority, but we can also incorporate civilian oversight boards, civilian review boards, in order to review academy curriculum. That way they understand how and why law enforcement do what they do. Understanding why, if they have a vehicle coming at them, why they might make the decision that they make. And then recognizing, is this something now that we understand, or is this something that we need to look at perhaps a policy change in terms of the academy training? So it has to be much bigger than just law enforcement. Also, the civilian review boards, they can demonstrate and share with law enforcement the values that are important to them in their community. And that may vary from community to community. So that really influences the community policing element. All right, then we want to look a little bit further and recognize that different groups have different needs. So diverse populations may require more specialized training. Not for the populations, but for the law enforcement who are encountering those groups. This again goes back to the community-oriented policing model. One of these ways that we've done this in the policing field is through crisis intervention training. Agencies that have crisis intervention teams have specialized groups who are trained to deal with individuals experiencing a mental health crisis. So that can also, and does also, reduce the likelihood of force. There's also cross-cultural competency training, which helps law enforcement understand maybe groups that have specific needs that are different. I'll use Garden City as an example. They have so many different ethnic groups and cultural groups in their community. And training law enforcement of some of the unique needs that may interfere with, may look very different culturally to them than what they would to someone who's been in the U.S. all their life. So we started delivering de-escalation training in 2022. And so we've got a significant amount of data from our regional training center and also the Eastern Regional Training Center that's located at the University of New Haven. And so we conducted a report evaluating the first 2 years of effectiveness of the training. What we found is that our de-escalation training reduces overall uses of force. It reduces officer and civilian injuries, as well as complaints against officers. And all the literature on de-escalation since 2019 supports this. The de-escalation training reduces these things. It also improves an officer's ability to recognize when someone is emotionally escalated. So they recognize if someone is already escalated, we're not going to intentionally escalate them further. We've got techniques that we're teaching that helps then stabilize that situation and hopefully prevent additional escalation. Also, our data showed that the training allows officers and effectively allows officers to tailor their response to individuals with certain personalities. And then all of that together shows that officers were able to convey procedural justice, which then increases police legitimacy. So, out of our data, the first question, recognizing emotional escalation. These results were compiled from a pre-test that we do at the very beginning of a training course, and then we do the exact same scenario at the very end to see if officers learned what we incorporated during the training. What we found, the pre-test results over here, the pink shows that they did not recognize escalation, the blue shows that they did. The post-test, we decreased from 36.76% who did not view or did not recognize escalation all the way down to 3.56%. Yes, Claire?
What did you use to show them escalation? Was it like a verbal scenario? Was it a video that you showed them?
Excellent question. So we actually do a scenario to where our trainers, we have 2 trainers, one is sitting in a vehicle, one is walking. They intentionally escalate a situation very quickly, and then the trainees are tasked with first identifying that emotional escalation, and then whether they utilize any efforts to de-escalate. If they go hands-on, they fail.
It was like a role play.
Yes. David, do you have anything to add to the scenario part?
Yeah, we always try to keep the scenarios realistic and relevant, but we have a very standardized scenario that we use for the pre and post test, and it does get very realistic, and it's set, and it's standardized. There's the actions, the words that are used, were the same things every time. The spacing, we try to keep consistent, that way we get the consistent results.
Excellent question, Claire, thank you. So then with that, you can tell from pre-test to post-test, we increased from 61% recognizing escalation to over 96% recognizing escalation. So this is just recognizing emotional escalation. This doesn't have anything to do with response yet. Yes, Ty?
My question is, if you're using like the exact same scenario from the pre-test and the post-test, how can you know that it's because of the training that the post-test results are better and not just that they're repeating the same situation they learned from going through it once?
Excellent question, Ty. So we do not give them any feedback following the first scenario. We go through it, we go in, we actually do the scenario before we even make introductions. It literally is the very first thing we do. Then after it's over, we go in, they have a quick break, we make introductions and get directly into the curriculum. So they have no feedback. They literally are taking what they learn then to change their response from pre to post. That was an excellent question. Yes?
How much time about was there between the pretest and the post-test? Like how long is the training?
So that's an excellent question as well. Our end user course that's our most popular is a 16-hour course. So it's 8 to 5, 2 separate days. And then our train the trainer course is a 4-day course. So they have 8 o'clock day 1 to 2 o'clock day 4. And as we're going through the curriculum, we don't revisit the scenario ever. So we want to make sure that we're not influencing the outcome of their behavior. It's strictly based on whether or not they've learned the material. Any other questions? Okay. The next one, did the officer adjust their approach to the subject? I know these numbers are small. Pre-test, just over 32% had an inappropriate response. That could be hands-on one of the role players. That could be pretending like they're drawing a gun, because we do make them leave their guns away from the scenario. That could be them yelling, anything like that. Or that could be just a range of things that would not promote procedural justice. This was scored on a 5-point Likert scale. So pre-test, just under 10% had a favorable response. Post-test, just over 83% had a favorable response. So favorable means that they were using the correct tools, recognizing who was most escalated and responding to that person first, meant they were communicating in a way that each role player's personality would respond best. So again, it comes down to communicating according to an individual's preferred communication style. And then the last one, overall effectiveness. And our group as a whole, and Dr. Steele specifically, have gone to great lengths to make sure that every single trainer recognizes how to score what the trainees are doing, so that we can eliminate any bias or as much bias as possible. But in terms of overall effectiveness, we measure several items. Like, were they positioning the individual who was escalated in a way that they could not see the other individual? Were they using language specific to personality? Were they, goodness, David, what I forget? There's a checklist of about 5 items there we're scoring on.
So the ineffective would be they either used force or took no action at all. The slightly effective would be they used just procedural justice, the 4 core elements that we teach there. The moderately effective would be that we're starting to see some tailoring based upon the needs of the subjects. Maybe they get one of them right, but not both of the subjects. With the very effective, now we're seeing that they're actually tailoring towards the needs of both subjects involved. And then with the extremely effective, that's where we see them tailoring for both the needs of both subjects, but they're also doing it in a safe way. They're bringing in their officer safety at the same time.
Perfect, thank you. So Again, you can see there, if we look at very and extremely effective, we're just under 9% pretest. That increases all the way to about almost 78% extremely or very effective post-test. So, in terms of de-escalation for agencies, we can't emphasize it the importance enough that agencies across the U.S. really take a look at getting this into their academies and their curriculums. It's important for increasing procedural justice. It also increases legitimacy of agencies in their communities. We've been very fortunate. The Kansas Highway Patrol has incorporated our training into their academy for new recruits. The state of Kentucky has incorporated the training into their academy for new recruits, as well as required in-service training. And then we deliver training. We've trained, just our region alone has trained almost 5,000 law enforcement officers since 2022. So we feel like we're making a tremendous impact on law enforcement in the central U.S., enhancing legitimacy of agencies in their communities, but also saving lives and protecting people in those communities. So, I mentioned at the very beginning, or pretty early on, de-escalation is not an end-all cure-all. It's not going to end unnecessary force, but it definitely will reduce the likelihood of it. This can lead to fewer lawsuits for communities. It can also reduce injuries for officers and to individuals in the communities. But most importantly, it's an important step for building trust and increasing legitimacy. So, if you have any questions on the data, Dr. Steele said please reach out to him. That is his email address. He is he's the stats guy behind it. I'm the doer behind it. So we balance each other out very, very well. So I will open it up now for any questions. Yes?
You actually, I just wrote down one I was going to ask, and then you kind of touched on it. But then do you have data? Because one of the ways I think to sell this is, this is a clear win-win. Because if you reduce lawsuits, you save the community money, but you also save the department a lot of grief and hassle, even if they're not paying out of their pocket. That diminishes. I mean, if a local law enforcement gets successfully sued, what's that do to public perception of the officers? So have you had enough time for you to collect anything related to reduction of lawsuits for the units that have gone through this kind of training?
So that's an excellent question, and we were waiting to put out this first study. It was actually published this past summer of 25. It was also made available as one of the QR codes, if you want to read through that. We were waiting for those results to be published before we then started pursuing the other avenue. So we're working on that now to collect that type of data, but that's an excellent question. Yes?
That article is included in our emails.
Yes.
Notification. So if you refer back to the email, you'll find it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
Community policing, the way it does show, helps a lot in fostering trust between officers and residents. But I was just thinking back to the beginning of your presentation, and you mentioned the killing of George Floyd, and you point to incidents in history like the Rodney King in Los Angeles. Could there be situations where the well has essentially been poisoned, where there isn't necessarily a way that's going to foster that trust? That all the de-escalation training in the world isn't going to improve relations and trust between the residents and the officers.
So that's also an excellent question, and yes, I think we all could agree the well has been poisoned in many ways with that situation. When we see law enforcement engagement with social movement organizations, that sometimes we see excessive force there. It's not something that's going to be easy, but over time, as people start to see that law enforcement all of a sudden are communicating more effectively with people in the community. We're seeing less negative publicity. That's going to be the guide. Honestly, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of positive publicity on the media, so it's just going to have to be an increased decrease. I mean, we don't see the negative stuff near as frequently, and as that starts to happen in some communities, that will bring forth a change. We can argue we're fortunate out in this area that for the most part, our law enforcement agencies are trusted by the community. I'm not going to say that's always the case, but more so than some of the other areas. So, go ahead.
Oh, and I'm just going to say, because I love the example of Garden City, because there's well over a dozen languages spoken with the migrant communities pursuing economic opportunities there. I was just curious, when there are language barriers, how might this de-escalation training solve that effect?
So, last I heard, there's 83 languages spoken in the Garden City School District. I can't even imagine being the one to communicate with all those. I don't know how it works, but I know that Garden City has an excellent reputation in their community for their law enforcement agency. They work very hard to engage the different groups. Obviously, they're having to bring in people who can help communicate for them. But I really think that those events, community or neighborhood events, is really what's important down there. So you build the trust before and hopefully to prevent something from happening. Other questions?
Is there any state that makes it mandatory to have de-escalation? And then, second part, is that even possible?
Yes, it is possible. And there are states, state of New Jersey, all agencies are required to complete de-escalation training. Unfortunately, it's not ours. The state of Connecticut just passed legislation that they're at the University of New Haven, which is one of our partners, that they are requiring our training now. So that's going through being finalized, but that's an example of that. We're still working on the state of Kansas, but with grant funding, it's not okay for me to be out there. I can't get out there and tell them they need to, just because of the grant funding. So
Is that something the legislature has to get involved with?
that, and also the Peace Officer Standards and Training Office has to do that as well. But we're working on it. So New Jersey and Connecticut are two that I can say require it. The state of Kansas does have de-escalation in their academy in Hutchinson. It's a little more generic. Doesn't go into the real tools that ours does, but it does capture the procedural justice. We were excited though when KHP decided to bring it in, and they did that in 23. Other questions? Yes?
I was just going to ask your view on, and then what the status is of NDI and LEAD. The National Decertification Index was implemented, but it got shut down in 2025. It's one of the things that if you just anecdotally go and find out what people are concerned about on YouTube, it's that a police officer does something, gets fired from one department, and just hops a state or a county or two over and gets hired by somebody else. And people go, how does this happen? When somebody who's had multiple instances of excessive use of force, doing the opposite of de-escalating, they're escalating to that.
So I'm well aware of the problem and what you're talking about. I'm not the one to respond to your question though.
Okay.
But that's an excellent question and a valid concern. Anyone else? Yes?
I know a lot of trainings can lapse and need to be renewed. It was like a one-time training that they then use throughout their career, or is it something that you see having to be renewed every couple years?
So that's also an excellent question. Currently, we are set up that we recertify our trainers every 2 years. We are working on the recertification for the officers who complete the training as well. But we agree that we don't want it to be one and done. Yes?
I didn't know if I really wanted to ask this, but my question revolves around, I know we have like a lot of like dating violence and things like that that officers get called to. Are some of their, like does the trainings include scenarios like that?
Yes, it does. We have day 2 of our training, about 4 hours of that is just strictly scenario-based training, and we include examples like that. So yes, that's very important as well. Excellent question.
To piggyback up on that then, can it be taught to students? I mean, you're talking about dating. Can it be taught to students? If in a situation of a couple having a stressful moment, can a student or a young person learn how to maybe de-escalate while the police are on their way?
So that's almost a 2-part question. So in terms of maybe a person being violated in a sexual assault situation, that may look very different. Right. But we do offer the course to our students, and we've had several of them who've gone into law enforcement and contact us with examples of, hey, I already did this, and my agency thinks that I'm awesome. So we love to get it to the students, and we do all of our scenario-based training. We incorporate not only law enforcement examples, but it's open to other support staff like dispatchers, fire, EMS, clinical staff. We tailor our scenarios specifically to their positions so that it's meaningful, going back to what David mentioned, like relevant, rigorous, and realistic. Yes?
If students are interested in doing the training, how would they go about finding ways to pursue that?
Okay, so it will be listed on the Fort Hays Public Course Search as CRJ 105 workshop, and it's listed as conflict resolution and crisis management. So it's a 1 credit hour class. Students can register for that. Actually, you'll have to contact me because it's blocked, so I have to register you, but I can do that. Any other questions? Yes?
Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize things, but I have a very positive story to relate. And I was going to just maybe even give you guys credit because how long have you been doing the training? And did you I assume, train people here in Hays?
We have. Our very first class was in February of 21, and we trained several law enforcement from University PD. And then since then, once new officers are hired for UPD, they go through our online training. So all of them currently have been trained in our curriculum.
Okay, so I think maybe I was the beneficiary of that. I've got some rental properties in town. I had a tenant who I took a chance on. He was a recovering alcoholic, had some things spiral downward in his life. And there was an incident where he drove his truck mocking as he was going to crash into the side of the house. He was not having a good day. This was when he needed to be moved out. Police came to the house. They were masterful in how they did nothing to even give him an opportunity. You know, it's sort of like you just don't give anything for a person to strike against. I thought they calmed him down. This is a person who was saying that he told them, literally, well, you know, I could kill him, pointing at me, because he was judged to be legally incompetent by a judge, and that's why he'd lost custody rights to even visit his own son. That's when things went downhill for the man. They ended up, you know, taking him to get some mental help, and it all went as well as anyone could have thought, and much better than it looked like it was going to at one time. So 2 officers did an outstanding job here in Hays, Kansas. So thank you. I bet that's because of your training.
Absolutely, I'm going to say that it is. But I'm also going to put David on the spot one more time. He has a situation that happened locally on the roof.
The roof?
I'm going to have him tell you about this. This is truly our training in action.
Well, first, before I forget, you need to call Chief Scheibler, let him know about that. Our guys don't hear it often enough. All too often we hear the negatives, and
I did talk to him sometime after the event, but it's worth reminding him again. Yes.
Yeah, just make sure they got an attaboy for that.
Yes.
They deserve it.
Yes.
So right before I retired from the Hays Police Department, Kansas Highway Patrol chased a gentleman into the city of Hays, going 130 miles an hour the wrong way down interstate, head-on into traffic. He ended up zigging and zagging all the way into town. They ended up losing him for a little bit. Found him again. He ditched his car, got on foot, and ran on foot. He ended up climbing on the top of a local business, and as he's up on the roof of the business, myself and 2 other officers managed to get up on the roof to try to talk to him and make the arrest. And as soon as we get on the roof, he runs over the edge of the roof, throws his hands up in the air, and he screams, "If you come any closer, I'm gonna jump." At that point, I realized this is not an average everyday situation. This is not a person who's clear-minded behavior, so I need to take a different approach. And thanks to this training, I knew what approach to take. And so I started following the steps that were taught in the class, and because of that, we were able to eventually talk him down off of that roof without having to use any kind of force, and he turned himself over. He actually shook my hand and told me thank you before he climbed down the ladder to turn himself into the highway patrol that was waiting at the bottom of the ladder. So it was an excellent example of how this training, when you stop and you make that cognitive decision to say, okay, I'm going to take a different approach, this is the way to do it, and it's very effective. It's one of the reasons why I chose to retire early and dedicate more time to it, helping out with the program.
Great, thank you so much. So one last request for any questions, otherwise you've been a great group. Cool. All right, well, thank you so much.
That concludes the program for today. Thank you very much to Dr. Lynn for this excellent discussion. And thank you to those of you who joined us on Zoom as well. And we look forward to the next event. Isaac, do you happen to have that on the top of your head that we can announce the next time talk?
I believe it's, Magdalene Moy is giving one on AI in the classroom.
Yes.
On March 12th, I think.
So.
On March 12th, I believe at 11 a.m.
That's what
Yes.
this
Is
is.
that what it says on there? Yeah, 11 a.m.
Okay.
I believe it's either in here or the Trails room. I don't remember off the top of my head. Stouffer, it's in here. So we'll be back here on March 12th at 11 a.m.
Perfect.
We hope to see you then.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.